Hello and welcome to Raising Financially Fit Families with Joline Godfrey podcast. I'm your podcast producer, RJ Malik. Joline, hello, and I see you have a guest. Why don't you give us a little brief description of today's topic and then introduce your guest?
Thank you, RJ. I'm happy to be here again. Today, I'm here with a friend and colleague who brings two worlds to the table at the same time, and I'm going to see if we can bring them together. Jonathan, welcome. Delighted you're here today. And as I've briefed you, I've said to you earlier, I want to bring together your world as a true, serious economist, because that's how you and I know each other, with your life as a dad. And, I don't get that very often. I often get one or the other, but this is raising financially fit families. And I'm sure somebody listening would think, oh, sure, as an economist, he must have it down. But I'm curious to hear your story and how you bring your two worlds together. So let's begin there. First, tell me something about your life, your practice, and your kids.
Sure. And I love the challenge of bringing all of your worlds together. I feel like that's the way to live authentically. So let's go with that. As you noted, I'm a Ph.D. economist. Now, I moved from Paris to LA when I was 17 years old to be a musician. So it was a long way from the origin of all this to where we are today. I think it's all been a terrible but really fun mistake. And I think that's important. I mean, it's important as it relates to the way I think about the world, which of course is informed by my being an economist, as well as the way I think about raising our kids. And as you noted, we've known each other for a very long time. Our families are friends. You knew my wife when she was, very young. And so whenever I talk about parenting, I feel like I need to acknowledge that, I am at best on a good day 50% of the attempt at parenting our kids. But I did become an economist, a serious economist, as you like to suggest. I guess I'll just say I'm professionally trained. I'm a PhD economist, and very importantly, the thing that seduced me about economics, started at the beginning as a young, largely confused person. Right when you're 18, 19, 20, and you have any curiosity about the world, you recognize, the world is a pretty mysterious place if you don't have a framework for thinking about it. And that's really kind of, where it all began. I went to UCLA to complete my undergrad degree. I met a guy by the name of Earl Thompson who really changed my life because he gave me a set of frameworks to think about the world. And so as I think about parenting, I think, that's the direct line, but I also think that mentorship is just invaluable. I did deviate not only from wanting to being a musician to wanting to be, an academic economist, but I eventually went into the practice of finance, which again, if you think about, one of the great challenges about understanding the world, I suspect that understanding not only the economy but markets is just an endless pursuit, which is really fun. And so I ended up going into the family office world. I worked for the Ziff family through the financial crisis in risk management, which, as you can imagine, was an incredible place to be and to start. Thinking about just, again, everything that was going on in an integrated manner. I had gone to UCLA undergrad. I had the California bug. Now my wife is a true, Northeast girl. She was born and raised in Brookline, Mass, and spent, over, I guess, almost 15 years in New York City.
Yeah.
But we did move back to California. And I'll spare you the rest of the kind of the resume, but eventually 2 years ago, I decided that the time had come to launch my own firm, Treussard Capital Management, which is really kind of the sum total of the experience and knowledge that I just described to you, apply to the task of managing private wealth. So that's the backstory.
Right. A good, full, robust backstory. And again, one that, a listener might say, well, he's got background, he has education, he has a framework, and he's 50% of a good parenting team here. What's the issue? And I guess the question then somebody would be legitimate to ask is, what do you want for your kids in terms of how they grow up and what level of financial fluency they have? And what are the issues you worry about as a dad, and how do you address them? I mean, that's my lifeblood and heart's work. So
I know, and I love that. So I'll tell you, I'll throw a handful of things at you, and then we can kind of dig in.
perfect.
The most important part is to just acknowledge that money is just a huge part of navigating the world and navigating life. And
Yep.
one of the things we're very intentional with is, on-ramping our kids into just the reality of money. And of course, it's a function of their age and their sophistication and maturity, but just engage with money because you don't have a choice. And it's one of those things where in a lot of cases, I don't know if people think it's gauche to kind of talk about money, or more importantly, and I think this is really important. I just gave a talk to a group of young women who are finishing high school, and I was invited to speak to them before they go off to college, type of thing. And I said to them, I think there's a reason your parents are outsourcing this to me, which is it's scary to them. And it's, and so I think part of it is just acknowledging that this is really important, and yet it's very confusing. And we're all supposed to pretend like we have some kind of, expertise over it when no one's taught us. It's a little bit like medicine. Like who would claim that we know how to treat ourselves over the course of a lifetime? So number one is engaging with it.
Yep.
And again, it varies, we talk about, and maybe it's a warp perspective because of the fact that my wife's father is a finance professor, and of course I'm a financial professional, but we talk a lot about what things cost and all of that, and not in a way that is meant to be discouraging or the opposite, blingy, but just because it's a fact. So that's number one. Number two is, I think importantly, and this is true of all children, but recognize that I have two daughters.
And they're how old?
Except they're 13. I have twin girls, 13 and a half. And what I really want all kids, but particularly my daughters and other female children to understand as they're growing into adulthood is get used to complicated answers. And, the idea that things are, this or that is just, it's just not conducive to a more subtle understanding of reality. And so get comfortable with complexity and not knowing and saying that's okay. And the other part, and again, this is very important, on the way to building wealth or on the way to inheriting wealth, get used to big numbers now.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, again, like some people are perfectly happy throwing around numbers that, are like $1 million, $10 million, $100 million, $1 billion. Well, you're as entitled to those numbers now in your head. And by the way, it may just be part of your future. So my point to you is get comfortable with uncomfortable things. Complexity.
Scale is what I talk about with families all the time. Every now, well, not every now and then, often a family will come and they'll tell me that the allowance they give their kids is the same number as their age, which means that they're getting, if they're 10, they're getting $10 a week. And I think, oh my God, the fact is that 10-year-old is probably just in terms of snacks for the week, spending more than $10. So until kids can really understand how to navigate scale, money seems crazy to them. So I love that you're talking about big numbers, Jonathan.
Absolutely. And again, I mean, as I'm now running my own business and we talk about that as a family too, my kids will ask me, well, I just registered in the state of New York, right? And so there is a fee associated with that. And they were like, did that cost a lot of money? And I told them what the number is. And it's not a huge number, but they were like, wow, that seems like a lot of money to me. And I'm like, no, it isn't. It's actually worth it. All of that. So kind of making intentional decisions, kind of goal oriented. And then the last one that I would throw out right now, which goes back much more to my kind of training as an economist, and I think it kind of like it opens the door to just a lot of conversations. Is understand that life isn't a succession of pictures; it's a movie. And of course, I can tell you that this is based on, a life cycle model, blah, 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 but that's irrelevant. The point is, the moment you shrink your thinking, the moment you shrink your horizon to one day at a time, you kind of lose the thread. And it means, so I told you I was just talking to this group of young women, and I said to them, again, like think of a movie on your phone. And obviously a movie is a succession of frames. And your job when you're making kind of life decisions is really twofold. One is to get from one frame to the other in a semi-intentional way. But importantly, like, the most embarrassing thing that could probably happen to you is like if in the next frame, the next chapter, like, you're like in the picture, like, on the ground, like with your finger up your nose. You know what I mean? So like do things now that set you up to be where you want to be in the next frame, right?
Really?
Which I think is really important. And it doesn't mean it's not leading with a sense of morality or, whatever. It's just understand that your decisions today have an implication for tomorrow and like navigate that trade-off. It's okay. And I think, as we think about things that people do naturally, procrastinate or, anything like that. It's just, there are certain things where like not acting today is probably the right move. Like let it be the next frame's decision. Like we don't have to make all the decisions today. But then there are things where like, fundamentally, if you don't do it today, it's just not it's not gonna look better tomorrow. I'm just gonna assume that if you choose to avoid filing your taxes and paying your taxes, like it's not getting better by tomorrow morning. That sort of thing. And then the other job, if you think, and this is where, it becomes a little psychedelic relative to the video on your phone, is it's not just moving through frames. If you're kind of going about this well, you're actually stretching the frame for your life can get bigger.
Yeah.
And that's kind of awesome when that happens. We don't have to live constantly narrow frames. And that to me that's the holy grail is what can you do that will make your life bigger, and you get to define what that means. But so those are things that are on my mind a lot as we talk to our kids, as I talk to children and young adults around me, that sort of thing.
Well, it's interesting because you're talking about helping kids very early on practice building a vision. And in my own experience, I would say, vision is really not, people will say, well, what is your mission and what is your vision? That doesn't spring just easily out of the brain. That takes time to evolve and practice. And, whatever vision I had 30 years ago, it's quite different. And probably, as I think back, much more limited, honestly, than my vision today. So I think what you're doing in terms of that stretching the frame, if you will, is a great metaphor, particularly with young people who are trying to figure out how to get through tomorrow. It's like, oh, now what do I do? But I want to move to backing up even more. I talk about fish all the time. And so it's assets that are intellectual, social, and human, as well as financial. And I know you do that in your practice, and I'm sure you do it over the dinner table with Mo and the girls. How do you, as a professional, as an economist, factor in the non-material assets of a family's life? How do you even communicate that to your own family, to your own children?
The answer is that's incredibly important. And it's incredibly important for a lot of reasons. The narrow, economic definition of human capital, right, is your ability to use your time and skills to derive income. That's the way the economists think about it. We know that's a decent definition for, a lot of people, but it's not complete.
Right.
Human capital is so much more. And I love the way you break it down with the intellectual aspect and so on and so forth. And I think the best thing you can do is practice it. I don't think this is, I don't think this is something you can necessarily, put on a whiteboard. It's just every day we have complicated conversations, intellectual conversations that require weighing pros and cons of arguments in front of our kids, right? So to the extent that most of intellect isn't just facts, right? Though
Right.
we value that, and my kids did homework until like some version of 10:30 last night. And it wasn't because I was driving them to. They had like this insane math worksheet that literally had this, it was called 100 angles. And it was this crazy geometrical shape, and they had to figure out all the angles. And they were like, we're doing it. So there's value in hard knowledge. I'm not disputing it.
Right.
But I think
Right.
a lot of it is just, and it goes back to what I was saying to you earlier, get used to the complex. That's intellectual fitness, right? To just be like, well, I don't know the answer, but let's talk through it. And then the other part, which is something that Mariah's taught me, first and foremost, is the value of community.
Yeah.
And it's huge, right? And you and I know that community can be hard to come by, particularly when status plays into it, when money plays into it. And I think it's important to kind of fight it and lean into community, even when you feel different in a variety of ways. But I grew up in Paris. I lived in big cities until we moved to Newport Beach, which is much smaller in scale. And I thought for a long time that anonymity was just and is, and maybe even a feature, that there was something about being anonymous, about being in the mass. And I have, again, my wife has fundamentally changed my thinking. The power of community is unbelievable, to feel surrounded. And so our house is the nexus of community. We have, my wife has this incredible thing. She has a cookbook club where, once a month, some version of 10 to 12 women, come over for the evening, and they've picked a cookbook and they've cooked, and it's just so powerful, right? And that's just a small example of community. But I think it's critical. And then the last thing, and again, I like to give credit. My brother-in-law said something to me, which really resonated with me more recently, Sundar. And he said, the reality of life is, we're all going to stumble at some point. Whatever it is, health, career, relationships, there's always going to be, you should be so lucky as to have a lifetime of never kind of being like, now what? And in those moments that you should prepare for, it is often the case that the greatest asset you have are the people who love you, the people who care, the people who say, what can I do to help? And so that's, to me, that's irreplaceable. It's not, and I don't mean this in a transactional sense, right? I don't mean this in a, bank favors now for later type of way. It's
Right.
just live your life in a warm, open manner that invites just being there for each other.
Boy, you remind me, actually, one of the things you and I have not yet done, and we should do either live on a podcast or, when we get together, is a fish inventory. So one of the things I talk about a lot in my work with the families I work with is that we take for granted that you go look at your portfolio if you're on top of things at least once a quarter to get a sense of where things are and what you need to adjust and all of that.
Right.
But when I say to families, well, I really think you should do the same with your portfolio for your intellectual capital, your social capital, and your human capital, they look at me because we are not practiced in assessing our non-material assets, as I think about them, in a concrete way. And as you talk about the cookbook club, I am reminded that here in Ojai, we have a soup group. And, every now and then a group of us get together and we make 3 or 4 soups. And that comes out of the fact that one of my friend's neighbors was the writer behind an extraordinary cookbook, and we honor her with those soups. That is community. And when I think about my own asset list and my social capital, I'm with you. It's not about my transactional, who is in my network who can do something for me. It is who is in my network that I have a relationship with that will give me a sense of self that I know is there for me, but also for whom I can be, so that, there is that sense of not being alone in the world, but also being able to give. So developing that inventory, I just want to put on the list of things you and I need to do, is something we can try to get.
I love that. And again, I mean, you do it in a way that's true to you. I'm kind of a lunatic. I like to go get takeout. I don't like to order, I don't like to do the delivery deal. I like to go get it from the restaurant. Right. And whatever, for a host of reasons, one is I actually like to go, to say hi to whatever, local restaurants. But in the car, when I'm like going to get takeout, it is not unusual that I'll just call a friend.
Yes.
And it's like, and it's like, why are you calling? I'm like, I don't know. I had 5 minutes. I just want to say hi. And I think that's really powerful to me anyway, because it makes me feel connected. And it's not, certainly it makes better use of the time than being in the car by myself, but it's just a way to connect. It's funny because this is a little embarrassing. I'm blanking on the name, but there's a famous, actor who came out of kind of the early day SNL crews. I forgot which one. And he basically created this framework for himself when he became famous. And he recognized that as a famous Hollywood actor, that if he measured his self-worth and his kind of balance sheet, right, of like how he's doing, only by whether the next movie was a hit, or that his life was just going to be warped forever. And I think you can change that perspective from, Hollywood fame to wealth if this is kind of the main metric in your life. And he kind of he created this, I remember if it was 6 or 7 questions, but basically it was like, how am I doing on a variety of vectors? And he's committed to revisiting it on a regular basis, some version of every 6 months. And he's been doing it for decades. And it's, how am I doing with my, immediate family? How am I doing with my friends? How am I doing with my health? How am I doing with, is my work fulfilling? And as a creative person, does it satisfy my creative needs? How am I doing with my original family, the people, the family that I came from. And I think it's just so important to have a multifaceted understanding of life, because the moment you focus on a single thing, it just messes with your head.
Totally. And what you're calling an expanded notion of life, I refer to as an expanded notion of wealth.
Right.
Because what we see so often, of course, is kids growing up in some level of abundance, however they experience it, often do fall prey to asking their parents the questions, are we rich or are we poor? And they are thinking about money because
Right.
influencers, peers, everything around them is emphasizing money. And what you and I are talking about is an expanded notion of wealth conceptually. It's not just about the money, it's about your community, your family, your connections, what you know, what you're learning, what you're practicing. It's so much more exciting, frankly, and richer than if it's just about the money, which seems kind of flat to me.
It is. And so, yeah, so it is. I think it's this functional idea of expanding the frame, right? However you want to go about it.
Yeah,
Um,
we come back to that.
and it does seem awful to intentionally, or perhaps out of a lack of intentionality, limit yourself to one dimension. It's just not. You're setting yourself up.
Yeah. Which brings me to, I can't believe how quickly our time is going. This is a rich topic. I mean, you and I could go on, as sometimes we do, for a very long time. And I hope anyone listening to this today will either, write into one or both of us or comment on the podcast when it goes up. But I hope you and I will talk again too soon, because I think this is a new language in some ways for many families. They're not used to thinking about the expanded frames you and I are talking about. But I do think it makes family life so much more interesting.
I agree, and again, it means also that, and again, going back to being a parent and all of that, obviously, it many days are exhausting, but every day is a new opportunity to hit on different things, and
Right.
you don't know what today. Again, it's friendships. I mean, my kids are in middle school, and it's just whatever today brings. If you have this broader sense of, hey, what's at play here, you can actually address it in a more kind of integrated way.
Yes, I think that is a perfect place to bring us in for this particular conversation and leave us on the brink of a new one. So, thank you for joining me today, Jonathan. This is great.
Thank you so much.
Before you go, though, Jonathan, how about some contact information if people want to ask you some questions?
Sure. Well, the easiest place and the hub, if you will, to kind of find me is my last name. So just go to Treussard.com, Treussard as in David.com, Treussard.com.
Excellent. Joline, your contact information.
Well, like Jonathan, I always spell my name for the listener too, because it's www.joline at bounce-10.com. And also it's www.bounce-10.com to get to our website. So I look forward to hearing from anybody who's listening today.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and looking forward to your next podcast. And thank you for listening to today's Raising Financially Fit Families with Joline Godfrey podcast. Please like, follow, and share this podcast with friends and family. Until our next podcast, for Joline Godfrey, I'm R.J. Malik.